We are operating from mistaken anthropology in the philosophical tradition called expressive individualism.
Right.
The expressive individualism concept considers people not just as atomized individuals, but describes and defines the person solely according to their mind and will.
How does this reshape our understanding of what a human being is?
Unfortunately, very powerful and very wealthy people right now are thinking about all these questions and putting enormous amounts of money into thinking about human issues as merely engineering problems, optimization problems, and so on. And it's a very precarious moment because these are incredibly influential and powerful people with billions and billions of dollars, and a lot is at stake.
It's scary.
Yeah,
It is scary.
so.
It's
Yeah.
scary. Welcome to Axioma's YouTube channel, and thank you for watching our conversation with Professor Carter Snead, one of the world's leading experts in public bioethics. Before we begin, if you could do us a favor, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon below. Thank you so much. Mr. Snead,
Great pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
welcome back to Budapest.
I love it. It's wonderful.
Second time.
Second time. Exactly.
Second time in this great country. Well, you've crossed the Atlantic to attend our conference.
Yes.
Which actually takes its title from your book, What It Means to Be a Human.
Yeah.
A book which is listed among the Wall Street Journal's top 10 book of, I believe, 2020.
Yep.
So let me start with a very easy question, a basic question.
Yeah.
Let's say it's also the elephant in the room, if
Sure.
you will. What does it mean to be a human?
Oh my
Or
goodness.
perhaps even more basically, what is a human?
Well, there's a different ways to answer the question. I mean, biologically, and it's important, the biological answer is very important to the bioethical questions that we have. A human being is a living organism of the human species. And it's important to understand also that the life of the human organism begins at conception, begins at fertilization, the fusion of sperm and egg, at least in conventional natural reproduction.
Sure.
Sperm and egg fuse. And what emerges from that is a living, new, individual member of the human species that moves herself or himself along a species-specific developmental trajectory. He or she requires, sustenance in a hospitable environment, as we all do. And that at the beginning of life, that's our mother's womb. But then, of course, after we're born, it becomes it's a more flexible sort of
Sure.
requirement. But a human being is a member of the species, is a member of the human family. But in the book, I try to talk about and focus on certain aspects, inexorable aspects of human identity that are sometimes neglected in public bioethics, in the ethical discussions around the biosciences, biomedicine, biotechnology, as they come into contact with governance, sort of law, politics, policy. And that aspect of human identity, which I think is essential to who we are, is our embodied nature. Human beings are a dynamic unity, what Hans Jonas, a Jewish philosopher of science, called a psychophysical unity of mind and body. We're not merely minds, we're not simply bodies, we are a mysterious and beautiful and interesting integrated form of the two.
Yeah. Well, actually, the subtitle of your book, it says it's the case for the body in public bioethics.
Yes.
Now, so someone who's not familiar with the term public bioethics, how would you define what is public bioethics?
Public bioethics is the governance of science, medicine, and biotechnology in the name of ethical goods. It is actually when law, government, politics, policy come into contact with these ethical questions that arise from advances in biomedical science and biotechnology. And a lot of folks who are not in the habit of thinking about these things might reflexively say, well, I don't think we should govern lives in accordance with ethical principles. We should keep law and morality separate from one another. And at the law school where I teach, and at most law schools, we try to disabuse our students of that idea, because all law at bottom aims at a good to be pursued or a harm to be avoided or even punished. And so all law is necessarily about good and evil, justice and injustice, right and wrong. All law, to put it in a more technical way, is normative. All law means to reward certain behaviors, prohibit certain behaviors, shape other behaviors. And sometimes the law does that by allowing people, by getting out of the way and allowing people to order their lives as they see fit. And that's another, but the law is always present. And so the law is always about morality. It's unintelligible to say we shouldn't legislate morality, because all laws are inexorably moral, which is not the same thing as saying that every moral question should be legalized or prohibited or encouraged by the law. It's a narrower point, but it is the case. You take any law at all, including a traffic ordinance,
Sure.
and even that law has at its core a conception of a goal or a good or a harm that it's seeking to pursue or avoid. Otherwise, the law doesn't even make sense. And underneath that good that it's pursuing, there are conceptions of justice and freedom and autonomy and equality. And then below that, at the most basic level, there are conceptions of what it means to be human. Because the law, in its pedagogical function of both teaching behavior and shaping behavior, for better or worse, has to proceed from a preconceived notion of what a human being is. Because, again, what law is, at the end of the day, is a mechanism to protect persons or to promote personal flourishing.
Yeah.
So it has to proceed from a presupposition about what a person is.
Well, now, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because today we have quite a debate, let's say,
so,
about
yeah.
what a person is.
Yeah.
In fact, today abortion is present,
Right.
obviously to varying degrees,
Yeah.
in about 140 countries. We have 45% permitting fetal impairment. Then we have, obviously, euthanasia that has been legalized in
Right.
several countries.
Yep.
These trends suggest, I guess, like some sort of growing reluctance towards, accepting human vulnerability, accepting the reality of suffering.
Yeah.
Now, why does modern culture struggles with this? Why does modern culture finds it difficult to sort of acknowledge that we're humans, we have limited
Yeah.
capacities, abilities?
It's a great question, and I think the problem is, and what I'll use the word anthropology as a synonym for the longer conception of like what it means to be a person and flourish as a human being. So when I say the anthropological question, what I mean is presuppositions about who we are and what constitutes our flourishing. And I think at the core of the problems that you flag, the idea of not protecting, I would put it this way, I'd say we're not protecting the weak and vulnerable.
Oh, yes.
We're excising from the human family segments of the community, the disabled, the elderly, children, born and unborn, from the human community, because I think we are operating from mistaken anthropology. We are understanding what human beings are in an overly narrow way, and the mistake that I ascribe the current situation to is in the philosophical tradition called expressive individualism.
Right.
The idea is that we think of ourselves as atomized, radically individuated single selves. We don't think of ourselves in the context of community. We don't think of ourselves in the context of constitutive attachments that we have to other people or to traditions or to religion or to family or to nation or to civilization. We think of ourselves in a very abstracted and artificial way, namely the person is a single unit existing by him or herself without these constitutive attachments. And that's an abstraction and it's a fiction. You'll never meet the atomized individual.
Sure.
Like
Yep.
that's not how it works. Aristotle famously said that man is a social animal, whereas in the more modern political theorists, we think about this sort of man in a state of nature, but the state of nature is being isolated and abstracted from his fellow citizens or fellow people, and that's a fiction. You'll never meet a person who is simply solitary in the way that I'm describing. In fact, people are necessarily relational. And it's because this expressive individualism concept considers people not just as atomized individuals, but describes and defines the person solely according to their mind and will. The human identity is the mind and the will. So you are your mind and your will. Everything else about you, your body, your commitments, your attachments, the web of relationships in which you find yourself, that's all accidental and incidental to your identity. The real identity is your mind and your will. And so it's what philosophers call dualistic. We say the mind is definitive of the person, the body is merely accidental, and then it defines flourishing as the sort of introspective exercise where you consider and search the interior of your own unique sensibilities and ideas to find your original authentic truth, which may be unprecedented, it may be transgressive, and then you identify that truth and you articulate it, and then you formulate your life plan accordingly, and you pursue that life plan as a solitary individual will. Now, You might come into contact with other human beings. They are other atomized wills. You might meet them in collaborative relationships where you find a project that's mutually beneficial, but as soon as it's no longer mutually beneficial, you break apart. And sometimes you encounter other humans as adversaries, as wills to be overcome. But you can never really have definitive attachments to other people in this framework. And there's no such thing as an unchosen obligation. There's no such thing as what philosophers call teleology, where you can actually understand the meaning of the world by examining it as it presents itself to you. Nature itself doesn't provide you with any normative instructions or ethical instructions. Your body is just a blank slate in which you can use to whatever purpose your will can devise. And it's an incredibly, in the first instance, you can see why this is an attractive ideology, this expressive individualism, because it's like very, it prioritizes the sort of radical individual who's bestriding the hostile environment to impose his or her will, and it's kind of romantic. And I mean that in a literal sense, because actually the romantic poets, and especially English poets and literary figures, push this notion. Although they actually still believed in a universal truth that was natural and accessible and understandable. The modern iteration is nihilistic. The modern iteration is you create your own truth, and that's the only thing that's binding on you is your own internally generated truths, authentic truths. And so, in any event, you have this kind of ideology of expressive individualism, which is attractive, especially to Americans, because we're so fixated on freedom and liberty. And freedom and liberty are, of course, important things, and we are particular individuals. But it's not the whole story about who we are, because it ignores our embodied nature. It ignores the fact that we are, not have, but we are, A-R-E, we are living and dying bodies. And that is constitutive of our identity, and that stands us in a particular kind of relationship to one another, which has significant ethical consequences.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, in your book, you outline a paradigm and propose also a vision that kind of aims to protect those that we just mentioned who are profoundly vulnerable and dependent. Now, what is this alternative paradigm, and how does this reshape our understanding of what a human being is?
Yeah, I think if one turns away from expressive individualism and understands its inadequacies for our shared life together, because expressive individualism doesn't even recognize those human beings who are not capable of the sort of flourishing that it valorizes. They're not those that are not capable of cognitively, introspectively searching their own sensibilities for unique and authentic truths and then shaping their life plan in pursuit of those truths. People who can't do that are left out. They're not part of the human community. They're not even intelligible within this framework. So the elderly, the children, the disabled. And as I said in the wonderful program that you all had before, the reality of human life is quite different from that. The reality of human life begins in total dependence, and in the very best that's even before you're born, your very survival is dependent upon your mother and her supporting you in her womb. And then you begin this upward trajectory of growing in your powers to the height of your powers, if everything goes as best as it could possibly go. And then you immediately pivot downwards into a state of total dependency again. And expressive individualism only recognizes the person at the peak of that curve and ignores that the vast bulk of humanity exist on the up and the downslopes of those curves in a state of vulnerability and dependence, because we're fragile living bodies in time. And because we're fragile living bodies in time, we exist in relationships of mutual dependence upon one another. So human flourishing, and this is getting to your question, human flourishing, what we need for flourishing is not merely freedom. We need freedom, but not merely freedom. What we need are what Alasdair MacIntyre, Catholic philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre, calls networks of uncalculated giving and graceful receiving, made up of people who are willing to make the good of others their own good without counting the cost, without seeking anything in return. And so everyone depends on these networks for our very survival because of the dependence that we have as embodied beings.
So you basically just described a person that we would call Christ-like.
Right, exactly. No, that's right.
Yeah.
Or what Aristotle would call a friend. You know what I mean? Like that is the idea of authentic friendship is making the good of the other your good. And the only reason any of us are alive today is because someone did that when we were very little. Is almost certainly our parents. And so the parent-child relationship is the perfect paradigmatic example of the network of giving, uncalculated giving and graceful receiving. And so we depend on this at all stages of our lives. especially the most vulnerable stages of our lives. Some people exist in a perpetual state of vulnerability because of disability or circumstance. And so what we learn from thinking about these networks is that we depend on them for survival, which is basic, but then we also depend on them to learn to become the thing that we were created to be, which is to be the kind of person that can make the good of another person their own without counting the cost. Put in a different way, because of our embodiment, it's clear that we are made for love and friendship. That's human flourishing. Caring for one another is human flourishing, not the assertion of the unencumbered will.
Now, in today's conference, What is to be Human? We examined how bioethical, sexual, technological, legal, and demographic forces as well sort of affect our understanding of the individual and the dignity of the human person. Beyond, let's say, abortion, euthanasia, and these common topics, what would you say are the top 3 challenges in an age of AI, transhumanism, expressive individualism, to quote you directly, sexual freedom, and so on?
So I don't think the old problems have been solved. I mean, you mentioned abortion a moment ago. I think the killing of innocents, rooted in a false anthropology, which you could even trace back to in my country at least, the late 60s, early 70s, where there was a self-conscious effort on the part of moral philosophers to think about how they could justify or create a kind of permission structure for abortion, began a process of philosophically gerrymandering, if you will, the boundaries of humanity to exclude the unborn, to be able to declare that the unborn are not persons, for the sake of achieving a policy goal, an outcome, which would be maximal access to abortion. So you begin with a kind of corrupt project in the sense that you're beginning with a highly motivated reasoning, and you're philosophizing in a post hoc way to produce the outcome that the elite wants. And that move that they make in terms of excluding the unborn in the late 60s and early 70s is made over and over again in the context of bioethics to exclude people with dementia. And these philosophers come up with the notion of personhood as an exclusionary category to say, not all, you began by asking me what's a human being. A human being is a biological reality. It's a name we use for a certain kind of organism who, in the flourishing form, usually is able to exercise rational faculties, but not necessarily because of all kinds of reasons. And anybody who is a member of the human species is a human being. What personhood theory sought to do was to exclude certain human beings from the category of personhood for the sake of benefiting the privileged and the powerful. Exclude the unborn, exclude the intellectually disabled, exclude elderly people suffering from dementia. And you see this actually time and again in history under this concept of dehumanization, which is a category that social scientists use to talk about what colonists did to indigenous peoples, to see what Americans and colonists did in the slavery context, to see what's been done to the disabled throughout history. And so it's or even in genocide, in modern genocide, what the first move is always dehumanization. And so that, to me, dehumanization using categories and boundaries, manipulating the boundaries of humanity, strikes me as a very serious continuing problem. That's one. It's long. 2, I think we have deep problems with the combination of genomic interventions and assisted reproductive technologies. I think the way of making babies and forming families raises deep problems that implicate the question of what it means to be a parent, what it means to be a child. And as I argue in the book, the further away you move from the paradigm of a child as a gift to be welcomed and loved unconditionally, what Leon Kass called a mysterious stranger that appears that must be welcomed and loved unconditionally, the further away you move from that using technology and will, the more damage you're doing to the parent-child relationship, which is not to say that everybody uses fertility treatments, don't love their children. Of course they do. But our actions have significant symbolic and pedagogical consequences. And the structure of our actions matter. And the third thing you mentioned, I mean, I think, again, I'm learning more and more about AI, and especially as it comes, and AI is a kind of computer simulacrum of personal presence that's disembodied. And if we struggle with resisting the temptation of expressive individualism, especially the most elite and powerful of us.
Sure.
Because the more power you have, the more expressive individualism becomes a warrant for your own choices and behavior. If you interact with an entity that is trying to trick you into thinking that it's a person, but in fact is not, it's an algorithm that
It's a language model.
It's a language model
Yeah.
that simply is doing math and what's the next word most likely to be in this kind of exchange, but does so in a way that seduces people into believing that they're interacting with a genuine intelligence. That's going to supercharge our connection to expressive individualism with all the cascade of negative consequences. Very wealthy people right now are thinking about all these questions and putting enormous amounts of money into thinking about human issues as merely engineering problems, optimization problems, and so on. And it's a very precarious moment because these are incredibly influential and powerful people with billions and billions of dollars, and a lot is at stake.
It's scary.
Yeah,
It is scary.
so.
It's
Yeah.
scary. Well, finally, as our time is up, you've advised many major institutions, and I would probably highlight three very important names. President George W. Bush, well, not a name, but UNESCO, and Pope Francis. Now, you were an advisor in some aspects to all of these
Member
names.
of bodies that
Yes.
offered advice to these
Yep.
people. Yeah.
Now, if you can highlight one core goal that you try to bring to the attention to these leaders, to these institutions, something that has been ever since you entered the field of public bioethics, what would that be?
That's a great and difficult question. I think, and it's hard to translate concepts that are intelligible to those different audiences. Obviously, the Holy Father and the Catholic Church has a very specific, and I'm Catholic, it's a kind of anthropological frame and way of talking and way of seeing the world and understanding identity and flourishing in the context of our relationship to God. And so talking in those settings is quite different than it is talking in the President's Council on Bioethics, which advised the White House and also served as a liaison to the public more generally in different interfaces with Congress and administrative agencies and intergovernmental bodies. And then UNESCO, you've got 190 plus countries with people with very different cultural backgrounds that they're coming to. So I'd say one thing, though, that did run through all three of those contexts is the concept of human dignity, which is more readily understood in the American context as relating to basic human equality, right? So dignity is, and is obviously a rich human rights tradition, which dignity plays a significant, albeit ambiguous role. It's sort of a placeholder, at least in intergovernmental bodies and in more secular spaces, for what it is that makes human beings valuable, inviolable, and entitles them to certain kinds of privileges, and in some cases obliges them to do other things, to care for others. I think human dignity is a vexed concept. I think it's hard to get your arms around. It's meant different things in different eras of history, but I think it's incredibly valuable. And I think the concept of constantly trying to remind ourselves and the principles that we are part of a group offering advice to is to constantly remind our advisors or our principals about the intrinsic equal value of every human being, but not as a mere abstraction, because then you can fall into individualism as well, but in a kind of relational sense about how both human dignity and the common good and our interactions and relationships to one another are, you always have to keep those in front of yourself. And you can't ever, it seems to me, compromise on the inexorable, intrinsic, inalienable value of every human being. Because if you once that becomes negotiable or a bargaining chip, then we're in very serious trouble.
Well, Professor Snead, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching our interview with Professor Carter Snead. And please, if you like this video, share it with your friends, with your family members. God bless.